Greetings and salutations, everyone. Today we're going to be taking a look at the Byzantine Empire and Eastern Europe during the post-classic age. We're going to focus on Constantinople, what made this place so significant. So let's get started. When we take a look at the Byzantine Empire, we really have to remember that its origin was with Rome. When the Roman Empire was at its height, it was decided that it was just too big to be managed as one nation state. So it was ultimately divided up. It was Diocletian who decided to cut the empire into two manageable halves, and then that was thought to be easier to manage. And on paper, he was correct, until you realize that the eastern half of the empire is where the wealth is, and the western half of the empire is where the military arm was. Now, the wealth of the empire could prop up the military, and the military could take care of itself. But one of these needed the other much more, and it really wasn't understood that until Rome ultimately collapsed. The decision to move the capital to Constantinople was made by Emperor Constantine. When he became emperor, he decided that this new city, which he would rename after himself, would become the new capital of the Roman Empire. When he converts to Christianity, this was one of those giant moves. His next big move is making Greek the language that was spoken officially in the eastern half of the empire instead of Latin, which had been the Roman language for so long. Now, from the time of the fall of the Roman Empire onward, the title of emperor is still going to stick around. It is an empire. The Byzantine Empire is that. It is a large nation state with lots of different cultural groups underneath it. And there were a couple attempts for the old Roman Empire to show up again from the actions of Byzantine rulers. Socially speaking, we see that the Byzantine view of the family unit was really pretty rigid, really super conventional. This dated back to the earlier Greek Athenian style, where women had a place, and that place was in the home, and they were not allowed or expected to go out, to go do anything else. They were expected to wear veils, but on the long enough timeline, we do see that women are given more opportunities to do more stuff. They enter nunneries, they can become leaders, they have economic rights, the whole Megillah. As the Byzantine Empire stretched and got bigger and bigger, it started to incorporate all the other groups that had been part of the Roman Empire. And this was really significant because Rome was slow to incorporate new areas. For the Romans, if they conquered you, you have to pay the taxes to them. For the Byzantines, if you were conquered by them, you were part and parcel of the empire. You were expected to get involved, take care of your area, support the empire as a whole, not just pay taxes. And this meant that all these new people are going to have ownership over this empire as well. Probably our most significant ruler of the Byzantine Empire is going to be Emperor Justinian. And in 533, he decides to try to retake the Roman Empire, all the land that had been lost, and the Roman Empire had fallen a generation before. He was duplicitous in trying to achieve this, and he started acquiring a lot of land, and he acquired quite a bit. Everything that you can see on this map that's outlined by that thin red line would be how big Justinian would make the empire. Now that is really surprising that he's able to conquer such a vast area in only 4 decades. Unfortunately, though, shortly after his death, almost all of it is gone within another generation. It's just unable to hold itself together without a very powerful military under an extremely powerful emperor. Without both of those things, this kind of system in this area was just not long-lasting. When you talk about Justinian, it's always important to talk about Theodora because, wow, she was an interesting character. She had the ability to, well, she came from nothing. She would become empress. She wowed, wined, and dined and surprised Justinian so much that he brought her into the fold of royalty when she started her life in one of the lowest social classes in Byzantium. And this idea that you could rise through the ranks is really a good component of both the social characteristics and the political reality of the empire. One of the big things that we see come out of the Byzantine Empire, especially by the end of the 6th century, is this massive cultural change. And one of the big ideas is preserving the big legacies of the Roman Empire, like Justinian's Code. This was taking the old Roman law and making it functional, creating a guideline for judges, modernizing it, and creating something that's kind of like Hammurabi's code in the if you do A, B is the punishment. Constantine's conversion to Christianity had started this trend that the emperor is a religious figure. And for Constantine, that worked really well. And it started a trend that the emperor is not just the head of the state, the head of the army, a rich guy. He is also ordained. Big G God was involved in him being selected to rule. And that's what we see. This divine right of kings is kind of synonymous with absolutism later in Europe, or the mandate of heaven that we're going to see in China. While we see women like Theodora come to power, there were women who also ruled exclusively. One of these examples was the Empress Theodora, and as opposed to the Empress Theodora I, who was married to Justinian, this Theodora was the daughter of the emperor. And when that emperor died, she became the ruler. She was an empress, and she refused to marry. She knew that if she married, then her husband would rule and her power would just kind of disappear. This was a big break from all the social and political norms that we had seen for so long. The other big cultural accomplishment that we're going to see is the creation of the Cyrillic text. Now, this was created by a couple of Byzantine missionaries, Cyril and Methodius, and they went out preaching the word of Christianity to some Slavs, some Eastern Europeaners. The problem comes into existence because neither Cyril nor Methodius were able to speak the language of the Slavic people. Now, you could just get like a translator or a phrase book, but these guys did something better. They actually developed a language, a written language that still exists today called the Cyrillic text. And if you look at Ukrainian or Russian writing, that's the Cyrillic text. It's still around in much the same way that the Latin language has survived in Italian, French, Spanish, and to a degree, English. Justinian did a lot of stuff. Culturally speaking, the law code was a big social impact, but if we're talking about big buildings, then we got to talk about Hagia Sophia. It was built with the intention of showing to the world, I am rich, I am powerful, I've got it all going on. And boy howdy, does this place have it all going on. It is the icon of every major cathedral that we are going to see until the mid-15th century. If you look at anything else that's being created during this time, they're all trying to recreate Hagia Sophia, the best gold, the best marble, the best everything. Money is great, and you can see on this chart down here in the bottom right, the Silk Roads. And Constantinople, it's in modern day Turkey, it's what we call Istanbul. You can see that a lot of those red and blue lines are going into that city. Constantinople was the center of trade, And when you've got all this stuff flowing in, you have a cosmopolitan civilization. Everyone's getting everything they want. Since there's so much of it, you can also get it at a decent price. And the rulers of the city knew that cheap equals happy. The rulers of Constantinople kept the food prices in the city and for a large part of the empire relatively cheap, but it was artificially cheap. And that's a short-term fix to keep people happy, but when there's a run on your food supply, the price is going to explode and there's nothing you can do about it. You can see here that the size of the Byzantine Empire was impressive, but the other part of it that's noteworthy is, except for the Sasanians to the east of them, there was no big threat. I mean, the Persians had kind of always been a threat to the Greeks, but at this point, there wasn't anything else until there was the Muslims. You see, when the caliphates began to create themselves, and as they started to expand, and they're going to come out of Saudi Arabia, going back to that picture, maybe not, oh well, the expansion of the Arab Muslims and creation of the caliphates is the real threat that the Byzantines hadn't expected. Persia was a threat, that's without question, but the caliphates were a different kind of threat, because this was not a group that was united by a nation. This was a group that was united by a faith, and that's much stronger and much more difficult to fight. In the end, the Byzantines had to use Greek fire, Roman fire, something that's equivalent to napalm, in order to win even a little bit. And then it wasn't really a long-term victory. It was just a band-aid. And the Arab fighting was not over forever. It was a pause, but while the Byzantines were focused in this direction, from the Slavic states, the Bulgarians start expanding, modernizing, and attacking. This was not a threat that the Byzantines ever expected. The Byzantines looked at the Slavic states, well, rather poorly, to say the least. An example of how poorly this was viewed and what took place was in the 11th century when Basil II convinced a group of Bulgarian noblemen that there was peace, there was no reason for any fighting to go on, brings about 15,000 Bulgarians, noblemen, retainers, knight soldiers, a lot of people, to Constantinople, has a big feast, everything's going well, and then Basil blinds them. His army comes in and just tears their eyes out, and it's pretty horrific, and it did not lead the Byzantines to finding many friends as the 11th century ended and they really kind of desperately needed them. As things continued to go bad for the Byzantines, one thing that kept them going was the idea that they were it. The light of Rome had gone out, and it was gone. The only place that the light of Rome still lingered was in this one town, in this one empire. And for many Byzantines, they believed that they were divinely blessed to keep the fight going. We had talked about the Great Schism of 1054, the division between Christianity and the Greek Orthodox. And this division actually strengthened the faith in the Byzantine Empire by making it more relatable and more understandable. A lot of this division would continue, and the division between the East and the West would be a unique dividing point for, well, heck, for the next 1,000 years. Over time, things start to go downhill for the Byzantines. The city of Constantinople was sacked in the Fourth Crusade, which was a great surprise because this was the city that initially asked for help. Over time, the city got back on its feet, kind of, but it was never the same again after this point. And slowly, the territory of the Byzantine Empire got smaller. The monarchy got weaker. They were unable to control trade with the rise of the caliphates. Those groups will. And, well, it all comes tumbling down. This was a collapse like we had seen with Rome. It was not a one-day event. There was a lot of things that had been happening. The gaps between the wealth and the poor were growing. The poor were not happy. The food costs were going extremely high. Everything that could be going wrong was going wrong. And then the Black Death shows up again. And this is one of those, well, golly, if everyone is failing against it, the city is going to fail too. Ultimately, the fall of the Byzantine Empire marked a decided end for the light of Rome. And it is a metaphorical light, but it does end here. It will lead to the start of something new. And in the rest of Western Europe, the fall of the Byzantine Empire doesn't affect them much. For the Muslims who take it, for the Turks, the Ottomans, this is a huge victory. But the story of the Byzantines kind of doesn't go away. It just changes a little bit. Now, that's enough for today, though. Hope you all learned something. I'll see you next time.